Well, hello again. Just a reminder to everybody, whether you're here in person or on Zoom or Facebook Live, to feel free to let us know what your prayer requests or testimonies might be. We wish to share them and we wish to pray for them. So today I'm reading from Mark 8, starting at verse 27, and I really hope that you'll follow along on the Bible on your phone or in the handwritten or the written book that you have in front of you. I'm starting at verse 27 of Mark 8 and reading through to 38. And in that scripture it says, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." When we read that, the message may seem kind of straightforward. Jesus and his disciples, they've been together a while. They've been doing some things together. The disciples have traveled with him through Galilee. They've watched him as he healed people from all sorts of different diseases. He's healed the disabled. He's helped so many who were troubled in their mind, and he's driven out demons. He has told the stories in parable form so that people could understand. He's taken a couple fish and a little bit of bread and fed thousands of people. He's walked on water. He's been able to stare down the criticism of the religious leaders every time they've tried to trap him. But this is a day when he's there and he says to his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" When you go out and you're just talking to somebody, what kind of reaction do you get about me is kind of what he's saying. And the reality is, not much has changed from then till now. Everybody has a different opinion about who Jesus is. And they replied, "Some people say you're John the Baptist. Others say you're Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." But then he looks at these 12 men that he has handpicked, that he has chosen, that he has brought together to be his closest confidants, his closest workers, the one he has shared the most with besides God himself. And he says, "But what about you? Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers, "You're the Messiah. You're the Christ." And of course, he had the right answer. We see it all the time when we do Bible studies and everybody has their book open. And there's a question and everybody's looking for that right answer. They may have no idea what it means, but they're looking for the right answer. If Peter just been taking a multiple choice quiz, he would have got a great mark. But if he'd been asked to write an essay or put into words what he actually meant, he would have failed miserably. And the fact is, most of us would. See, we're not any different than Peter. Because as soon as he began to teach what Jesus began to teach to the disciples, what it means that he is the Messiah, that he is the Christ, Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. It says, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. He basically said, the people who run the country, the people who you hold in esteem, that the world holds in esteem, are going to reject me. And I'm going to be killed and rise again after 3 days. And Peter says, oh, no, I don't think so. Nope, 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 nope. And that shows right there that Peter had no idea what it meant to be the Messiah, to be Jesus. And like the rest of Israel, maybe Peter thought that God's Messiah was supposed to be a great warrior like King David, but way, way better than that. He would have had a huge amount of power, and he would have restored Israel both nationally and religiously. And it's certainly not that the disciples and Peter hadn't witnessed Jesus' power in many ways. He knew Jesus was special. And so he had the right term for who he was, but he didn't have the right meaning. And after Jesus rebukes Peter, he calls the crowd over to him. Because there were a lot of people following Jesus, and it wasn't just the 12 disciples. And then he says to them in verse 34, it says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Sounds pretty straightforward, but really, what does it mean? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? See, Jesus says what it means to be the Messiah. He says what it means to be the Son of God. He says what it means to be Jesus Christ, Son of God, sent to earth. He is going to face betrayal, denial, suffering, death, and resurrection. He's going to face betrayal, denial, suffering, death, and then he'll be resurrected. Okay, we can accept that. I mean, it's not something we're likely going to have to go through ourselves. But he goes on to tell us what it does mean to be one of his disciples, one of his followers, someone who will be close to him. And I don't know if any of us have it figured out yet. I'm sure I don't have it all figured out. I mean, I can say the right words and I believe the right things, but can I live the life? Can I live the life Jesus did? Do I live the life Jesus did? Do I even try to live the life Jesus did? Do I even have any understanding of what it means? When you accept Christ, it's one of the biggest deals in your life. And it can be a hard decision to make depending on where you're coming from. For me personally, I had to reconcile why I did anything. Why did I want to teach my kids right from wrong? Why did I, what difference does it make whether I steal time or a bit of stuff from an employer? Or what difference does it make whether I have integrity in my business dealings? What does it matter whether I party way too hard and hurt my body? And yet, I accepted Christ, and everything began to change. And I can honestly say I've never been the same person. And yet, I'm sure that I've tried to go back many times. I mean, when we think of the Israelites, how they wandered around, Moses led them into freedom by God's power. And yet, they get out into the wilderness, and the Israelites are saying to Moses, why didn't you leave us in Egypt? We were better off as slaves making bricks with barely any straw for Pharaoh. That's a pretty harsh statement. I'd rather be a slave, enslaved in Egypt, than I would free. See, but there's a statement made by somebody that grace is free, but it's not cheap. And being a disciple of Jesus Christ is not an instant fix for your life. It's a long journey. It's a lifetime journey of learning, falling down, getting back up, and commitment. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. There's been times I've wanted to. There's been times I'm going, God, really, I just want to throw in the towel. But I can't. There's something that drives me on. And it doesn't mean that I don't fall into temptation. It doesn't mean you don't. Having in our minds the things of the world, the things of people, rather than the things of God. See, the people listening to Jesus knew exactly what taking up the cross meant. They'd already watched Romans crucify how many thousand Galilean troublemakers. Imagine the impression this must have made. And yet here comes Jesus. And he takes up the cross not because he has to, not because he wants to. He takes up the cross because of a fully perfect, selfless love for me and for you. And he says, if you're going to follow me, you have to take up your cross as well. But as long as I'm considering myself, as long as I'm worried about my needs ahead of anything else, I'll always be looking for the painless shortcuts to the kingdom. We look around our world and we see the world trying to come up with another way that doesn't involve a cross. But only when we deny ourselves and take up the cross can we follow Jesus. A man named Shane Claiborne spent a summer in the slums of Calcutta with Mother Teresa, and he wrote the following about one of his experiences there. And he says, people often ask me what Mother Teresa was like. Sometimes it's like they wonder if she glowed in the dark or had a halo. She was short, wrinkled, and precious, maybe even a little ornery, like a beautiful, wise old granny. But there is one thing I will never forget, her feet. Her feet were deformed. Each morning in Mass, I would stare at them. I wondered if she had contracted leprosy, but I wasn't going to ask. Of course, hey, Mother, what's wrong with your feet? One day a sister said to us, have you noticed her feet? We nodded, curious. Her feet are deformed because we get just enough donated shoes for everyone, and Mother does not want anyone to get stuck with the worst pair. So she digs through and finds them for herself, and she wears the worst pair herself, and years of doing that have deformed her feet. That's an example of selfless love, picking up your cross and following Jesus. Now the reality is that Mother Teresa, as good as she was still human. So she had to have doubts. She had to struggle the same as you and I, because she was a sinner too. But she found her peace in Jesus, and she found her way to serve. Billy Graham was responsible for helping so many people come to know Jesus Christ. But even he talked about the things that he didn't like, about being so involved with politics and politicians. The Apostle Paul himself, the first man to bring the message of Jesus to the Gentiles, admitted more than once in his writings that he had a hard time following Jesus. But he said, I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus has taken hold of me. But how is it working for you? How's the discipleship thing working for you? Now, I can tell you that this, you could go through this and you could go, boy, that sounds kind of scary. I don't know if I want to take up a cross. But I can also tell you that since I've started following Jesus, I've had more sweet times in life. I've been to more places. God has opened more doors and made things available to me than I ever could have imagined. So when we take up our cross, it's not that he's going to leave us in a lurch by any stretch of the imagination. Do you find yourself getting discouraged? Do you doubt whether it's worth it? See, there's really nothing more difficult and yet nothing more beautiful and worthwhile and wonderful than being a disciple, than being a follower, than being one of Christ's own. Because that's what truly can give us hope in the midst of this busted up world. Our world's a mess, people. It's what can give you a cause to love. It gives you the ability to love the unlovely, to love the ones that the world can't love, that the world condemns. You know, you think back to the story of the woman caught in adultery. And by the world's standards, she was scum. She was garbage. She was, well, we should kill her. We should stone her. But by God's standards, she was something else. And if I've picked up my cross, if I'm truly following Jesus, if I'm truly allowing him to come through me, then when I meet that adulterous woman, I have the ability to say, I don't condemn you either. Now go and don't do it anymore. I have the ability then to love someone who the world says is unlovable. See, there's nothing that can make us understand the world, the love that God has better than God himself. And if we, for the odd moment, can forget about ourselves, can wrap that towel around our waist and wash people's feet, then we truly do catch a glimpse of God's kingdom. And it's worth far more lifetimes and all the money and fame that you could ever have. So the question is, have you caught a glimpse of God's kingdom? Have you seen it for a moment or two? Would you like to see it for a moment or two? Because if you do want to see it, if you want to be his disciple, then you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow him. But he will lead you in a way that is amazing. He will lead you to places and to people that you couldn't ever imagine. And he will teach you how to love them, to truly love them. Not to accept the garbage, not to accept the sin, but to truly love people and set the garbage aside. That's what picking up the cross and carrying it means.